Welcome to round 4 of National Debate Championship 2014. Without further ado, on the motion that this House will allow individuals convicted of any crime to run for Parliament, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to start the case. Q&A.
Our stance is very clear today. We will allow the individuals who convicted any crimes to run for Parliament. So, what's the characterization of this debate today? The first thing is, we don't think anyone who has any criminal records should be stopped from running for Parliament just because they have committed crimes in the past. And that's therefore our first mechanism is we will allow anyone with any criminal records as long as they have served the sentence that they're supposed to serve, and they have. And also, secondly, we will not allow people who are already being charged for any sentence. They are going to be in prison soon to run for Parliament because we think there is a waste of resources and there's no reason for us to do that. And so, what are the individuals that we are talking about today? The individuals that we are talking about today, it's not any ordinary individuals that are working on the streets, but the individuals who have relations to politics, who are the politicians who appear in the political field. And also, what's our burden today? As long as we can prove these burdens, we take this debate. First thing, we'll tell you why under our policy, the quality and the effectiveness of the Parliament will not be undermined. And also, we think that under our policy, we are able to create a more holistic platform to run as a Parliament to run the country, and we will create a better quality of politicians, even if these politicians may have criminal records in the past. And what's the burden that opposition have to prove to us today is, the first thing, they have to tell us why by allowing these individuals who have criminal records to run for Parliament will eventually undermine the quality of the politicians, and also why the fact that they have convicted the crimes in the past will eventually affect the performance of them now when they want to run for Parliament. And also, even if these politicians they have committed crime before, the opposition have to tell us why the fact that we appoint them or the fact that they may get elected we only lead to them committed further crime as compared to those politicians with clean slate with no criminal records. So what's our argument today? The first argument is, why is it principally justified for us to allow these individuals who have committed crimes before to continue run for Parliament or to be elected as a politician against? First thing is, the first level analysis is, we don't think past convictions can determine one's individuals for as long as they live. The first thing is, we think that when a person being sentenced to prison or being in prison, we think that the sentence that's got from the court it's enough to rehabilitate this person, and to change the behavior of this person. I think that the purpose of sentencing is to create deterrence and to reinforce moral boundaries. And because of the crime that they have committed at that point of time is devoid of social approval, that's why they are being sentenced to prison. So we think that so long as they have served the sentence, and we think that it's fair and justified for them to come up as an ordinary politicians and with a clean slate to re-elect as a politician. We don't see any harm of doing that. And also, second level analysis is, we think that there is a natural check and balances under the status quo where people are rational, even if when you have past criminal records or you have committed crime before, people will know, because we think that when any politicians they committed crimes, media will set in and there will be media attention, so people will know that politicians has committed crime before. So even if we allow these politicians to join the elections again, it won't affect the results of the elections or eventually a very poor quality of politician we get in it, because people are rational and they still have the right to choose. It's not that we eliminate people the right to choose and force them to choose a politician with a criminal records, because we think that when some politicians they have committed serious crime, that means that people will judge them and people are rational enough to know what is right and what is wrong. So the natural check and balance is when the fact that people are still supporting that particular politician, that means that people are still have trust in that particular politicians, and that means that the politician, the fact that they have committed crimes it's not that impactful on the political career itself, where people still believe in that politicians and believe that these politicians is still a good politicians that increase the social welfare and can contribute to the society. That's why they support them. That's why they elect them again. So we think there's a nature check and balances. People still have the right to choose. And also, we think that for the party itself, we think that we will also allow these party to allow them to actually to choose their candidates, even if the candidates have criminal records, to join elections, because we think that these parties will have a natural incentive to choose the most credible candidates to represent the party to join the elections. So even if it have criminal records, it doesn't affect the performance if the party willing to choose them because they are more credible. Of course, if the party to think that that politician with criminal records are more credible, it's proven that apart from having committed a crime before, that politicians he has other qualifications that can counterbalance that the fact that he has committed crime and people already forgive him. So we think that it's fair and just. Yes.
Is it so convicted criminals are not even given the right to vote? Now you are allowing them to run for elections. Isn't that a double standard coming from the state on who gets to run for parliament?
No, that's explained in my next substantive. So we think that why is it further justified for these people who already committed crimes, especially politicians, to join elections again? We think that always these people who get caught and get sentenced to the prisons because they are representing minority and like things like how are not being sentenced to prison, and also like the sedition acts that we like hotly discussed now. We think that when they are forced to represent the minorities, they are more likelihood that these politicians are more likely to get themselves involved in sensitive issues, and that's the reason why we think court proceedings are not always fair and just to actually produce a verdict for these individuals. So there may be at that point of time there are lack of evidence or on any loopholes in civil proceedings. That's the reason why they get the verdict that they are guilty. But that doesn't necessarily mean the conviction is true, especially for politicians itself, because of the sensitivity that they are representing. And also, even if the committed crimes proven to be like the politicians proven to be real criminal, we already told you that punishment is already being given. So it's proportionate with their wrongdoing. So we think that they have served their sentence and it's fair for them to start the new slate, and they will have the nature incentive not to commit the crime again for the further support of the people. And moving on to the third rebuttal of why having those politicians with criminal records and coming out of prisons will create a more diversity in the parliament. So we think that in the parliaments, when these people coming from different areas, they have different ideas, so they will be more capable in cater of the different parts of the society. So we think for all those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would like to call on either of the opposition to present your case. Okay.
One thing government forgot to analyze is the actual reason why we don't allow the right to vote. We don't allow in status quo, we don't allow these criminals to run for parliament. We believe that there's a major flaw coming from government side. It's something that they had to characterize, but it's something they forgot to characterize. So before we go on further into my contention and substantives and all that, let's first clarify why in the first place we don't allow people to run for parliament, or we don't allow criminals to even vote in the first place. Because of what they did. What they did was, number one, a blatant refusal to follow the law, a blatant disrespect for the law. This we believe is something that is major. Why do you want someone who has already shown you that they don't respect the law and they believe that they are above the law, to be the people who legislates law for you or who tries to protect you within law, Mr. Speaker. Number one. Number two, Mr. Speaker, these criminals are people who have proven to you they are convicted, and therefore they have proven to you that they are not acting in the best interest of society, or they don't believe in the best interest of society. Why? Because they have harmed society, and we believe that's the reason why in originality, these individuals who are convicted are not allowed to run for parliament, right? So then moving on to what she said. So then moving on to what the Prime Minister said. So that the case coming from the Prime Minister specified to us that only ex-politicians or only politicians who have been convicted are the people who are allowed to who are in the context of the debate, right? We believe that this is harmful towards their cause, right? Why? Because then it's very easy for me to argue. Then if we take the example of Anwar Ibrahim has a lot of fanatics that follow him no matter what. We don't think that putting people already proven themselves to feel like they are above the law, and giving them and allowing them to have these people who blindly follow them or who blindly agree with them to continue on becoming leaders and to continue on running for parliament. We believe that the whole idea of check and balances, how society will feel, how society would still be rational, and how society will still choose the right leader, right, will not happen under their side. Why? Because of the very fact that these politicians are already established and they do already have a supporters base, and this supporter base will not change anyway, right? So then with her case, let's talk about her points, right? She told you about past convictions and how past convictions should not define you or should not define who you are. Government is living in a utopia where rehabilitation within prison happens all the time. 100% people who leave prisons are people who are rehabilitated and who can be trusted. We don't think so. There's a logical fallacy in her side telling us that we can trust these people with past convictions, and yet at the same time she never told us that our rehabilitative system can still happen, Mrs. Speaker. Secondly, she told us that this is where the contradiction is coming from her. Secondly, she told us that in certain cases sometimes there are wrongful convictions within law and within courts. We believe that that is true, but how is this a contradiction on her side? Because her first statement tells us that she believes entirely with the justice system, and yet her second statement tells us that she doesn't believe entirely within the justice system. We question your stance right there, Mr. Speaker. Thirdly, she told us about the benefit of how we have better diversity within our parliament and how we have more representatives for minorities. We don't think that this is something that is entirely very important for us to suddenly trust these ex-criminals or these ex-convicts, because we believe that under our side that can still happen. We still have representatives who do not have criminal records. We don't think that this is something extremely dire. Yes.
Mariam, this debate today is not a proper and permanent seat, an automatic permanent seat for convicted criminals. It's about whether or not you can pay for it. Number two, you just conceded that rehabilitation failed. Why then can't you allow these convicts to express that concern?
The thing is, we don't need these convicts to express that concern. We already have politicians to express that concern. We have society to express that concern. The fact that she knows that rehabilitation is not working tells you we don't need these convicts, number one. Number two, let's clarify a few things about running for parliament. Right? Even though it's not about being in parliament in itself, the act of running for parliament in itself is still harmful. Why? Two things. Number one, it's going to open doors for these criminals that we don't even know whether we can trust them in the first place, for them to go into parliament. Let's just say that let's assume that they are going to be elected, right? So that we don't think that we should put these people that we cannot trust within parliament at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, let's just say that these people who are Let's say that these people, that check and balances within society will work. We'll see that then why bother putting them into running for parliament anyway, Mr. Speaker. And thirdly, we tell you that this is a form of leadership. You will attain you will attain a support. You will attain a lot of supporters, and therefore you will still lead someone even if you don't go into parliament. So, and then my second argumentation is my second argumentation is about how this is a contradictory principle. Mr. Speaker, I told you earlier about how these people have already shown you blanket refusal to follow the law, and have already shown you that they feel that they are above the law, and they feel like they cannot, and they feel like they are people who don't apply, their lives do not apply to law, Mr. Speaker. We tell you that if you want to assume to trust these people, we don't think that we can trust these people. Why? Because let's just drop. We don't let policemen. We don't let criminals to become policemen. Why? Because even if you can trust them, it's still a contradictory principle for you to first recognize that these people are people who think that they are above the law, and yet you let them protect you within law and all that, Mr. Speaker. I don't even want criminals to run for parliament. I don't even want these criminals to represent me or attempt to represent me, Mr. Speaker. I am not a criminal. I don't want to be represented by a criminal. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader, of your position. Now let's call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to present his statement.
Yeah.
Opening government told you that convictions are never the benchmark to judge someone's credibility or the ability to work in the future, because it's highly discriminative, it's highly shameful for you to make that statement, especially for these politicians that are in a different arena that they fail to make a comparison to. So what they have said is they say convicted individuals can't vote, and we think that's not the debate. The debate is extremely different because it's very hard to speculate or regulate the votes that voters are making, because there are so many of them, because they have no any accountability from the public, from the media. But these politicians are different. They are running for campaigns. There are millions of people are watching their speech, are looking at their performance and judging them. They are so different because they can't afford to make any further mistake in the future. Because if they continuously commit crime, obviously people are not stupid to continuously allow them to be elected, allow them to be appointed to run for the parliament. We think this natural check and balance argument was totally neglected by opening opposition. When we tried to hear that from the second speaker. We think this media attention and public judgment on that politician is a form of accountability. We think this form of accountability can only happen on politicians and not these voters. So they are completely out of the debate. We're trying to move to a different stakeholder that we are not trying to defend on. So the second idea is that the assumptions they made were very flawed. First, they assumed these politicians were convicted on a fair and justified platform. For example, Mahathir prosecuted and put Anwar Ibrahim into the jail without any actual evidence. And recently, he even said, because I hate Anwar at that time, because I don't like him as a person. And we think if these justifications are given by the Prime Minister at the time, and you just allow them to be prosecuted for no evidence, we don't see how is that conviction justified for politicians, especially in this debate. So when you can't justify that prosecution, you can't justify the convicts will continuously commit crime, even though they committed crime. I'll prove to you why in the future there will be less possibility of them to commit crime in the future. No, thank you. So adding on the Sedition Act that allows the government to do anything, to just prosecute anyone without going through fair trials. We think it's adding on the burden for them to prove why are these trials or why is this justification actually fair and actually proven that the politician should not have the right to run in the future. And the second thing is that they assume criminals will always be evil and always want to commit crime in the future. This doesn't make sense because it's very discriminative. We think yes, there's a possibility of some convicts might still have the intention to commit crime. But that doesn't mean new politicians or these politicians that haven't been caught will have no intention to commit crime. Do you think this allows the platform for them to compete, for them to actually control each other in the parliament itself? Because if I were being known for being corrupted in the parliament, then you've given me a chance to run for the parliament again, it's less likely for me to commit a crime again, because people are always looking at me in a more serious extent, in a higher extent. That I will always get public attention or media attention in a higher extent. Everything for me as a politician and run for the parliament again, that I was previously convicted, obviously now I will be less likely to commit crime again. So I think they have to prove why these politicians will be so stupid and commit crime, and just like people will also be stupid to continuously elect them into parliament. Before that, yes.
How is anyone going to take the government or the judiciary seriously anymore now that they allow convicts to lead the country and champion policies?
Yeah, that's why we told you first, if you're being a criminal for continuous the long period of time, people eventually lose trust. People eventually lose trust on you and less likely to vote you in. The second thing, even if parliament, the government appoints someone without that person being elected, we think the party will already have the natural incentive to not elect or to not appoint someone that has no trust on the public, because they always want to win the next election. That's why we can see these ministers and with these high judges will always be appointed because of their reputation, because they win the votes, because they win the election. So we think it's less likely for a party to harm their own reputation by bringing in these less trustworthy or these convicts that continuously commit crime at the past to run for the parliament. So there's already a natural incentive. So if people still want to choose to elect these individuals into parliament, we think it's a freedom of choice, a freedom of rights. Because if you trust the person will change. The person will change after being prosecuted, after being released from prison. It's the right for you to choose, because there's only 5 years. If you see no improvement or continuously crime committing, obviously, first thing, they'll go to jail, so they can't actually run for parliament in that 5 years. So in the next 5 years, you can choose a new person, or you can continuously lose trust on these kind of individuals, and eventually this natural incentive is better than rather than putting a forceful idea that says these criminals will never be, will never change and will always be evil, in the sense that we think it's very unfair for these individuals. Because even if people still vote for a criminal that really committed a crime, let's assume to the best extent, they really committed a crime, it's really a fair trial happening, everything is the people's choice to choose to believe that politician. Because you remove the platform for them to justify themselves, you remove the platform for this politician to be given a way to prove that they have changed. You don't give a fair election, you don't give a fair trial. We think it's very shameful for liberal democracy, especially for US or even Malaysia, in this case, for the fair election, for the fair parliament to be given in the first place. So they neglect also the diversity in parliament. No, thank you. The diversity in parliament will be even better. Because why? Because when I fight for minority, the rights for minority, fight for those sensitive issues in Malaysia, obviously the likelihood for me to be prosecuted is obviously higher. Then we will lose this platform or this portion of valuable portion of these individuals in the parliament. You just disallow a huge portion of the valuable assets in the parliament itself. Because when I can't fight for minority rights because I think I will get prosecuted and will not run for parliament in the next election, it's very shameful that these politicians will try to protect their reputation rather than protecting the underground, the people on the ground. And we think this incentivizes them to work as a fair politician rather than just a politician trying to work for reputation. We think that's a bad thing. And because if I am brave enough to fight for minority rights, to fight for sensitive issues that continuously progress the nation, and you disallow me to do so, the nation will just be stagnant or will never improve in that sense. Because you disincentivize me to say something sensitive, you disincentivize me to fight for minority rights. We don't think debate is fair anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I'd like to call for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to present his statement.
irony how the government here trying to say that they want these politicians to be the parliament in order to have diversity and this holistic or quality of politics. Yet at the end of the day, they don't really care if the politicians will be entering the parliament at the end of the day. Because if they don't enter the parliament, then what they wanted to have, this diversity, this improving quality of politics and whatnot, will not happen at the end of the day. But nevertheless, let's talk about the Deputy Prime Minister. First of all, the idea of fair trials. First of all, we don't believe that that is our burden of proof to actually prove to you that the fact that we have to fix this judiciary system in the first place. Because what this debate is all about, it's not about whether or not these politicians are falsely executed or convicted. Because this is about if they have convicted and it is their crime in the first place, then is it okay to go and run for this parliament? We believe that the idea of fair trials in itself, if they have problems with it, then it goes to another debate where we can talk about how to improve the judiciary system and whatnot. But secondly, the idea of deterrence coming up from them, about how they say that they will not do this crime again. We believe that in the first place, we believe that it creates a backlash. It does not happen that way, right? Because at the end of the day, you did not create a limitation for them to actually go to that parliament. Because if they were to we are to open doors, what will happen is that the stereotypes that they're thinking is that even if I do this crime again, because I have my fanatics behind me, because I have my blind followers behind me, I have my own fan clubs like Anwar have, then I don't need to worry. I can just repeat my crimes all over again. And this in itself is very harmful towards the balance of the politics, because it creates such uproar, because you are letting somebody who does not fear of the law because they have their supporters. This is the first fatal flaw coming out from the government side, because they disregarded that there are certain politics who have this fanatics. It's as if they're saying that if you have good followers, if you have a large portion of the society who actually support you, then you can actually outrank the law. You can be the law yourself. But secondly, right, the idea of having these politicians to actually fight for minority. First response is that we believe that in order to fight minority, you don't necessarily need to convict the crime. You can always have discourses among these politicians. Come on, politicians are professionals. They are doing what is good for the country, and we don't need somebody to actually convict a crime or give a speech just because you want to fight for the minority. But secondly, we believe that even if you are a politician, doesn't mean that you are fighting for minority. Because at the end of the day, they didn't characterize the what kind of minority rights are they talking about. If they are talking about, let's say, for Malaysia, they are talking about the rights of races, or they want to equalize this kind of racist right. We believe that it creates a backlash. If you're letting these politicians fight in the parliament without taking account of what will happen to them, because they know that they can go back to the parliament again, then they do not fear of or they are only thinking about the interests of their races or the interests of that particular minority sections, right? Why so? Because it creates imbalance with this politics, and that is why it is harmful for the country. But before I move on to my new substantive, let me first clarify what did my first speaker talked about. She basically talked about the idea of if you are to already not trust the law to guide the society, then why should you be the regulators of the society? Same principle with being a police. We can't expect the society, or we can't expect somebody who already think that they are who think the best interest of them to actually protect the society. This in itself is principally wrong, and this is why we are going against it. But before I move on to my argument, yes.
Yeah, how does your argument on followers make sense when the law says a convict can't run for parliament?
Because the idea under your paradigm, you let the strength of the politicians be is the followers, not the law anymore. Because if you have a good fan club or whatever, then you will have the higher power than the law, because the people will always follow you no matter what you do. But let's move on to my first substantive, substantive. The idea of how it harms the country in itself. What will we do to the image of the country? Because who are politicians? Even if they are only running for the parliament, eventually we are telling the people that they are candidates of leaders, right? And even though they wanted to say that the society trusts these politicians in the first place. We believe that other countries does not think like the society think. The other leaders or members of parliament of other countries does not think that way. And what implication do we put in this is that we create lack of trust. We create a probability, a higher risk that we are not able to work with other countries properly, like doing collaborations of economies and whatnot, or doing or improving or developing the country in the first place. So we believe that this in itself harms the country and creates the portrayal that this country is led by ex-convicts. This country is led by people who are actually not trusting the law in the first place. We believe that this is very harmful. But secondly, under the idea of deterrence among politicians who are not convicts in the first place, what will they do, right? Politicians who have a clean clean record. We believe that there is, even though the responsibility of a politician is big and they do decide big choices for the country, we believe that at the end of the day, they also have big opportunity. They are open to wealth and whatnot, and they are open to the systems. And this in itself, we believe that will lower the deterrence factor for the politicians within the member of parliament to actually do such crimes too. But the last idea of legitimate punishment, why do you believe that it is okay for us to do this to politicians? Because first of all, let's look back and look at all particular conducts, not only politicians. We have to concede to the fact that even they are affected by this kind of law, right? Because even they are affected by even they have the difficulty to get any job. Because if you want to argue the idea of capability, then it is only fair for them to argue that everybody should come out of the prison with a clean record in order for them to get a job, because these criminal records does not affect their working capability, right? Because at the end of the day, this is not only about capability, but also about the trust of employers. If the employers do not want to trust this particular people at the same time, they believe that they should have the right to do so. By here,
Thank you, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Now let's move on to the closing half of the debate, and let's call for member of the government to present his.
CG will compartmentalize this debate. We're not just going to talk about politicians in Malaysia. We're talking about any crime. We'll bite the bullet and say, if you were a convict that committed any crime whatsoever, be it war crime, be it sex offense, or any form of crime for that being, we will still allow you a platform to run for parliament, because we feel that those individuals do not deserve to be painted in the same brush as individuals who will never change or who do not want to change, because we feel those individuals actually do need representation. In my speech, I'll tell you three main things. Number one, I'll tell you why we provide the platform for them to turn over a new leaf and why that's particularly important. Number two, I'll tell you why that form of representation is particularly needed and why we exclusively provide it. Number three, I'll tell you why we humanize the individuals who have been to prison and why it's not always bad, right? But before that, a few rebuttals. OO's case is that they have gone against the law, you should not trust them anymore. That is a very rhetoric that we want to change. You can see that a lot of individuals cannot be trusted and a lot of individuals do not want to turn over a new leaf. But there are segments of society, even pedophiles for that matter, who are necessarily remorseful or necessarily repentant, that do realize that they do not want to do anything that would inherently put them back in prison. So they realize the crimes and they realize the gravity of those crimes and they would want to change and would want to actually turn over a new leaf. But your side strengthens the rhetorics that these individuals can never be trusted and should never be trusted. But by that very definition, then you shouldn't be giving them jobs at all. By that very definition, you shouldn't be allowing them any platform to actually self-actualize upon going out of prisons, right? No, sit down, right? This whole rhetoric of, oh, suddenly now this image of the government will be so tarnished. We don't think it's always absolutely the priority, especially when certain principles of the government aren't always the most brilliant principles to go with anyway. Like consistency is not something worth upholding. We're talking about South Africa, for example. It worked out brilliantly for Nelson Mandela when he managed to turn over a new leaf, when he managed to also, become the president at the end of the day and actually become that very impetus or become the very example of how these individuals can not only self-actualize and are not only still humans, but are able to effect positive changes within society that could change the laws you so inherently want to be so consistent with. No, sit down, right? But this idea of, rehabilitation had not worked for them, so they're still inherently bad people. No, if you think it's a problem of rehabilitation, then the state should have that onus to also allow them any form of platform to actually effect changes regarding those things that you think are so problematic. You said you don't want to be represented by a criminal. Who cares? Criminals do not have a platform for representation. When they're talking about prison treatments, when they're talking about how police brutality exists towards them within prisons, because all of these other rhetorics are narrated or are dominated by individuals who don't have first experiences, who don't have those kind of same experiences as those prisoners themselves. All of the other rebuttals will be integrated within my speech. No, sit down. First substantive. Find the platform for them to turn over the new leaf. Why is this important? Because under status quo, jobs are not even provided for them. Or even if they are provided, they're minimal at best. If you want to talk about voting, fine. Look, that can be another debate, but that can also be something that our side has the opportunity to change, right? Why? Why is it so? Because it's a negative stigma, at which point you are branded as a pedophile, at which point you are branded as a murderer, even without realizing the reasons why you committed those acts. Individuals within society automatically demonize you and automatically group you within the same clump of people who are psychologically bad, or who are individuals who are innately harmful, who are innately demons to begin with. We think that's particularly harmful. Why? Because the platform for you to be able to change the stigma does not exist. When you're grouped together and you're painted in the same brush, the society wouldn't even give you the platform to voice out how you are able to change, or how you can also offer a counter narrative as to how you are yourself an example of how different individuals can also exist within a subgroup. We think it's particularly harmful when you don't allow individuals to remove the negative connotation they themselves can when they themselves can be seen as living examples. We think that this side has to acknowledge that not all criminals are necessarily the same type of bad. That's why even the law recognizes mitigating factors in sentencing, because the law realizes that a lot of individuals don't always have the same motive when they have this when they commit even the same types of crimes. So we don't think that like stigmatization is necessarily better under your paradigm. If anything, it's further reinforced. No, sit down. But because society imposes that negative perception, then the change will never happen. Even politicians, only on the surface, will touch about what these individuals are going through, but will never have the in-depth reach or outreach towards individuals. We think at which point they are able to run for parliament. They also have to do the things politicians do, right? They have to go campaigning. They have to have outreach programs with individuals. That's when you have the direct engagement from individuals who have been to prison with the people on the ground. So they can have outreach programs, they can have talks to actually, give all of these, they can do the whole 9 yards basically. Act as politicians, have outreach programs to actually engage with the society and allow society to change the rhetorics that are necessarily harmful. Before I move on, yes.
If they are stigmatized so much and distrusted so much in society, how are they elected into the parliament?
Because I just said it, when they have to run for parliament, they also do have to campaign. They also have to do outreach programs. So they will have an inherent incentive to want to go out there and tell individuals why they are different and why they can effect change. Because not all criminals are bad, right? That was the case of Nelson Mandela, effecting positive change as well. Let's move on to the second idea. Why is this representation needed? Because it's more harmful on your side to say they're not allowed to vote, they're not allowed to be policemen. Exactly. There's no minimal level of representation you allow for these individuals, because suddenly you want to pass this judgment that they're not only less valuable, but there is no value to them whatsoever. We think that's particularly harmful because even these individuals can be impactful in terms of trying to effect laws within society. When you're talking about the first-hand experiences that individuals who have been in prison actually go through, that's when you actually allow the individuals to portray the right depictions or the right narrations. This side of the house, OG, somehow decided to say that the check and balance itself is that they won't get voted. No. CG will say we think there's a possibility that they will get voted, and why that's particularly good, right? But you don't understand, if you are represented by someone from outside the prison, your representation is not necessarily what is truly depicted within society, and you have less of an incentive. But on the second level, right, we think it's also a possibility that these individuals are less likely to resort to radical means. When you're talking about what happened in Egypt, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood, they radicalized to a certain extent, where they were also allowed to be involved in discussions within parliament, because at which point they did have the platform to actually engage with society. Even though society branded them as radicals at first, they were able to understand that there's a platform or a middle ground where they could meet. On the third level, we think also recidivism is less likely. The idea that you would want to repeat crimes, because now you actually have something to cling on to, and you actually have accountability to the rest of the individuals of the right. Why is this particularly important? Because it fits into the characterization of why certain people commit crimes as well, that they have nothing in life to hold on to, that they don't have anything to lose, at which point you do give them that onus and you do give them that impetus. We think that recidivism is less likely. On the third level, you humanize these individuals completely, because you allow them to detach the negative connotation this side wants to impose, right? We're talking about teens, we're talking about troubled individuals who live in the slums, who could also benefit from the trickle-down effect of the individual being a fair example to that society. For all these reasons, CG takes the lead.
Member of the government, I would like to call for a member of the opposition to present here.
Parliament is not a rehab center for you to rehab and turn over a new leaf and try out whether I will be a changed person or not. The Parliament is not an advertisement center for you to advertise to the entire nation that, hey, ex-convicts can be good people too. The Parliament is where you make policies for people and the nation to guide their life towards, which is why it's something that we should take seriously and not something that we should ever go with what closing government or even OG wants, right? Several rebuttals that don't fit into my extension, but let me flash my extensions first. Firstly, I'll talk to you about why criminal records are different from any other past records, like for example your civil suits or relationship scandals. Then I'll talk to you about why it affects the political functionality in the parliament as a whole. But several rebuttals. Firstly, on this idea of change and removing the stigma, right? This is the idea. They say these people, there's an overwhelming society, a stigma in society that we will have to alleviate that by allowing these ex-convicts to run for parliament. My POI was then, if these people are so much distrusted, why would they be voted in? This is a critical concession from them, because they say it is the process of campaigning that is going to change the perception of people, not the fact that they are in parliament itself. Which means it is enough for us to run campaigns, it's enough for us to raise awareness through education and all these things, and those things are enough. There is an explicit concession. The point at which you stand in parliament does not hold water in changing the perception of people. At least that was not what they said in the member of government. Secondly, they talked about radical ideology, right? Or people who are criminals, that people are going to turn radical and extreme. We think that is a conflation of radical ideology and committing crimes. Those things are different, right? When you commit a crime, and if this person, the argument is these people are going to turn violent if they are not allowed to run for election. We argue that those people probably shouldn't be running for parliament if they're so crazy to the point where you don't allow them to run, they're going to burn out houses. Probably not very good people for you to vote in as MPs, right? At least that's what my common sense tells me. Thirdly, recidivism. Like, really, why is that even an argument? Just give them jobs, just give them wherever they can find a meaningful income to sustain their lives, to remove themselves from the chances of going back into crime again. Don't think there's anything exclusive about standing in parliament. Let's talk about OG then. I'll take you in a while. Right of the people and the choices. An argument that may make a bit of sense in this debate, right? There's a choice of the people, you have to allow them for the rights. But you have to concede to talk about the fact that rights are never absolute. It is always a balance between the rights of the people and the functionality of the parliament, which is why we have limits for who can run for election. Even if it's not criminal records, we have to allow sane people to run for elections. Probably in Malaysia, we should enforce trial a bit more. That's who are MPs, right? Sane. You cannot allow for people below a certain age, say 18 or 30 or 40, right? All these are limits to ensure the functionality, because people have to look at the person that is standing for election and trust that person, right? Which is why you can never allow people to say, hey, I want to vote that guy on the street, therefore he should run for election. Secondly, this idea about diversity and minority rights, right? Talked about in OG and then also rehashed in CG about reworded as representation. This is what they say. You have the diversity, you have to have diversity in the parliament, which means if that's really what you want to have, diversity, then you have to have a quota for everything. You have to have a quota for ex-convicts to ensure that they're in parliament. Have a quota for single women, married women, pregnant women, and all those things. But we want to argue that no, that diversities are never a yardstick for you to choose your MPs about, because you never have to be part of a minority group to represent minority rights. Abortion rights are always championed by rich, middle-class white men, the Democrats, and your quota for minorities and affirmative actions are always passed by the male dominant or the white people in your parliament. You never need to be a gay person to pass gay marriage bills, right? I'll take closing.
Look, I didn't say that it has to be diversity, absolutely. How do you best allow individuals who have been to prison, who have their experiences completely being told by individuals who are more privileged and have never been to prison?
By allowing non-convicts to stand in parliament and with that credibility that they have, champion for rights of the convicts and tell people that even me, who has a clean slate, can trust them, although we don't run for it. Because you have to give credibility and spotlight onto those people that the majority of the country can trust. What do we concede in this debate? We will concede that the ability, right, or the political prowess of these ex-convicts might not be compromised, which means they might still be good politicians, they might still draft very good bills. But what is the problem? We would argue that it affects the functionality of the government, right? Which means it doesn't matter how good a politician you are, as long as a controversial figure standing in the parliament, you affect the harmony and the coherency of the parliament as a whole. Why? First extension, criminal records are different from other things, right? Okay, maybe I'll skip that because I'm not done. Let's talk about functionality of government. Two levels. Firstly, you affect the people's perception. When you're a criminal, you have to recognize this. Even though you might be voted in, the majority of systems all over the world is that you're voted in by your constituency, which means either one state or one part of the country gives you that support to stand in parliament to represent that state. That doesn't mean that support comes from all over the country with overwhelming trust, which means that your stigma and all your things that they talked about still exist, which means the majority of the nation, when they look at this ex-convict, they still think that he's a criminal and they still have that perception to him, which means it will affect his popularity with the people. It will affect his ability to champion a lot of policies. It will affect his ability to persuade people to champion for anything that comes with like criminal justice or things like that, because he will always be distrusted. Second level, let's talk about within the parliament or within MPs. They will constantly for that 4 years be a target for political mudslinging, right? Because the ability for him to be persuasive in any issue of justice or punishment of crime will be met with jokes, will be met with mockery. Hey, why is that guy talking about law when he was an ex-convict himself? It is not about the ability of the ex-convict as an individual to fend off these attacks. So it's okay if he feels okay. No, it's not okay, because he as a minister represents a portfolio, represents a ministry and a department. There is a lot more at stake than just his personal rights and personal integrity. It has a trickle-down effect to everyone that is working in that department and ministry and their ability to carry out those bills and policies. We're very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Member. Now, let's call on Representative to call closing meeting. Yeah.
Law is not absolute. It's supposed to cater to the people's needs and is amended the point to meet those very needs. But law has failed the people when it excludes the most disenfranchised, the most oppressed, and we think that we need to change that. That's why we stand on side government. Number one, we think the side opposition completely mischaracterized and misconstrued the idea and the essence of the very debate, i.e. the right to representation. Whether or not you can exclude certain people to have certain voices being expressed, they never principally
justify that very stance. But let's deal with the kind of, touch and go rebuttals that they had on our case. The idea of like, oh, Parliament is a rehab center, like obviously, but the idea of the point of my POI is that when I question about the fact that if you are willing to concede that certain individuals are not rehabilitated even when they leave prison, then there's something wrong with the system. The fact is that there isn't, under status quo, enough representation to enact that kind of change for that very system because they just don't care. The fact that the entire line and the entire bench of characterization on ex-convicts was completely negative is the fact that you want to completely push them out of the window. You want to continuously disenfranchise them and never listen to them at the end of the day. There was already a principal concession. They don't even have the right to vote. That means that handicapped prisoners who enter prison are also disenfranchised, and who is like in the recent case of Oscar Pistorius, there were certain people who raised the concern that the fact that he's handicapped, there isn't enough accommodation of facilities within prison for his needs. The fact is, we need to protect these kind of individuals, those handicapped prisoners who have basic needs, basic human right needs, who are also being shunned out. That's just basic like law 101. So how then do you cater to those needs? That's when our policy comes in. Because just because you've committed a wrong in your life, it doesn't devalue the opinions that you have. We still listen to politicians who committed infidelity with their wives. It doesn't devalue the opinions or the regards in which they think about the whole nation as a whole. We think that these are the kind of people that we really need. But the closing opposition completely rehashed the idea of number one, that you really need to trust these politicians, and number two, it affects the efficiency of the government. Nothing was substantially new coming from opening opposition. But even if, I'm going to integrate that with my issues. But before that, let's deal with an idea of diversity of ideas. Like, their only response to the idea of diversity of ideas is that, oh, if you think that you really want this principle to stand, then just have a quota. That's so simplistic. That's not the issue. The issue is that you have a lot of ideas within society that just need to be heard out. What's so wrong with that? Diversity of ideas is extremely crucial, especially if you want to progress society. You need to progress not just the majority, and also you have to take into account the minority as well. I'm going to explain this debate into two main issues: the principal justifications why we need to have this policy, but secondly, can proper representation still happen under status quo? First issue, the principal justification, why we need to have this. Proper representation is so crucial. Why? Because you do have certain minorities that are just not being heard. What do we mean by this? I've already explained to you, brought out certain people like handicapped prisoners who've been completely shut down. The only place that they can go to is like the healthcare unit. But even if healthcare in prison is also ignored as well, that means that your state of being or your state of health and quality as an individual is also being oppressed at that point in time. We don't think we support that. But why then do we need to have proper representation? Because the idea of experience is so intrinsic within an individual that we have to have those who underwent and understand the importance of it, to have enough will and determination to go out and counter all the stigma and all the stereotypes that he has to face. But what's not happening under status quo? And why is proper representation can only happen under us? Because the fact is, politicians only fight for bills because it's a popular support. It's like a popularity contest. We're gonna fight for education of the children of the nation because people think it's popular. Like, the majority of politicians just want to be re-elected. Like, that's their main rational calculus. The point is, ex-convicts think about more than that. They actually think about people within prison. They actually think about the healthcare status, the state that is happening in the four walls within prison. Even if it's not about, like, their concern isn't about what's happening within prison, their concerns about education, their concerns about the economy of the country, or healthcare even, is still valid. You cannot invalidate those concerns by virtue of them committing a wrong in the past. Why is this also principally incorrect? Because the law in itself does not act retroactively. What does this mean? It does not convict you for acts that you committed 10 years ago. It convicts you for acts that you've committed now. The present you that you've committed now against the society is already being punished. But on the second level, these are ex-convicts. That means they've already done their time. You've already conceded they are ex-convicts. That means they've already paid back or paid their dues to society. They owe society nothing else. If anything, disproportionate society owes them something now. They owe the ex-convicts something now. What do I mean by this? Please sit down. It means that, like,
the society has been so unfair and unjust to them that we think that they do deserve a voice. Like the point is, when under status quo in Mexico, people join drug lords, they join gangs because they feel like the government has just not been catering to their needs. The point is, when they die, they're celebrated as martyrs because they've been fighting a government that's been oppressing them. This is the end result that you create when you don't give them the voices that you need. So who are these ex-convicts? I've already elaborated to you that these people have already done their time. But secondly, the OG, they said that these are people who think that they're above the law. This is a mischaracterization. Because the fact is, they don't think they're above the law. The fact is, they complied with the very law itself. They went to the judiciary. They acted like they have been with the fair system and the law itself. They've done their time within prison. If anything, they think they're below the law and they complied with it. So what happens? What are the harms if you don't have this policy? Number one, we elaborate to you that radicalize certain people. They just made fun of that. Oh, if they're really radical, we shouldn't have them represented in the first place. Look, that's not the point. It doesn't deal with the realistic issues at hand that you have at post-Civil War conflicts. You have certain minority liberal and radical groups still in play who are still strife with conservatism and radicalism, and they need some sort of representation. And the only representation that you can have is a moderate one. This means that proper representation within proper parliament, or at least campaigning on a very moderate and rational level. This is the outlet that they need. The point is, when Muslim Brotherhood represented the radicals, the radical groups or Islamists were very much moderate. They stopped bombing other people. This was because it was the very outlet that they needed to express their concerns, to protect their religious rights. If anything, not the radical rights, but the religious rights in parliament. This is what we're defending. Thank you.
Now let's call one position to
Madam Chair, I'm going to talk about three issues, right? Firstly, I'm going to address what's life after prison as a post-convict. Secondly, I'm going to talk about this idea, right? Whether the need for representation should overrule the functionality of a government that came out strongly in their speech. And last issue, whether this is a justified leeway or a loophole in the judiciary as a whole. Let's look at the first extension, right? Life as a post-convict. What happens after that? The closing government told us is we need representation, right? Look, it's unfair for these convicts. They could have turned over a new leaf. First response, what if they didn't? You have to err on the side of caution, right? Especially when the functionality of a government, especially when every policy that is passed through legislation and parliament affects millions of lives, Madam Chair. We're not willing to take that risk to see after 4 years whether or not these convicts are able to run as good politicians, and only after they've done collateral damage, then decide whether or not we should vote them out instead. We think it's a great harm coming from their side, right? But this is another problem coming from them, that just because just because you serve your sentence does not equate to admission of guilt. Why is this important? Because if you do not admit, there is no gauge, right, to say that just because these convicts have served perhaps 5 years or 10 years, that they've turned over a new leaf, that they've changed for the better, and therefore they can run for parliament. Because you cannot provide us with a gauge for this, we think it's extremely harmful to then allow these convicts to run, right? We find it unfortunate that, yes, perhaps a small percentage of people may have changed, but because we cannot gauge that, therefore we would not allow this to go through. No, thank you. We think the concern for these post-convicts, right, after you have come out of prison, the first concern and priority you have is reintegration into society. We're not saying that we want to shun them forever, right? But the reality of the debate is the stigma will follow you inevitably. So it means, right, on a humanistic level, that if you allow them to run for parliament, you allow them to run for elections, not only will they be like the joke of town, but the fact that this label, right, that they are actually willing to stand for parliament, although they committed a crime, will follow them for the rest of their life. The fact that it would the fact that it would follow them and this stigma would alleviate, like, in any context of their life inevitably. But the whip told us this, right, that she was so concerned about Oscar Pistorius that disabled convicts should also be allowed
to vote or to run for parliament. Look, number one, the problem is not about disabled convicts, right? We are perfectly fine with disabled people running for parliament. The problem we have is that they are the convict, right? Not the fact that they are disabled. We think it was a bad example to begin with. No, thank you. She told us as well that we should celebrate these people as martyrs, right? But like number one, right, they're assuming that these people are going to be moderate to begin with. We think that it's very assumptive on their side. But let's look at this further, right? Because even if that was the case, we're okay with extremists, right? That's why we even allow Perkasa or we allow ISMA to run for election and for parliament as well. We allow these parties to persist within society. But the problem and the gauge here is that if you are a convict, it means that you have constituted structural harms towards society. Because you have constructed those harms towards society, therefore the state has a right to take away certain liberties from you, and that is the basic thing, such as in status quo, you are not allowed to vote if you are a prisoner, and therefore you shouldn't run for elections to begin with, right? No, thank you. Let's look at the second issue, right? Because this idea was echoed in both houses. The second issue, should the need for representation overrule the functionality of a government? Both sides of the house wanted this, right? They wanted free and fair elections. Number one, they're assuming that the public would vote these criminals in to begin with, right? Considering that both sides told us about the stigma and how people wouldn't vote them in to begin with. But secondly, right, we question you, why would you risk something as important as national issues to convicts? Parliament is no time for trial and error basis, like some rat race or some guinea pig trial, like, oh, maybe like for representation's sake, right, we'll allow you to come in. We think it's not as simple as that. What did opening government tell us? They say that, look, there's a check and balance, that if these criminals are not good politicians, then people would naturally vote them out. We tell you it's a 4-year process, right? And it's not worth the damage and the risks that we're willing to take. We think that the judiciary should always have a zero tolerance policy with regards to all these convicts to begin with. No, thank you. Furthermore, right, opening government said that they wanted to champion diversity, and this was also echoed, remind you, in the closing house. Diversity in representation is contingent upon certain criteria, right? We allow quotas for women, yes, like in the case of countries like Rwanda. We allow constituency allocations like for different states like Penang, Selangor, Sabah, Sarawak, how you have certain seats for certain states, representative of the demographics of your society. That's how you garner diversity. That's how you garner different viewerships at different points within society. But why do we not allow the viewpoints of convicts? Deborah told you, right, that their inclusion would be on the part of people who are already credited as politicians, political parties that can stand on behalf of these individuals. Why do we not allow them to stand, convicts to stand in parliament to begin with? Because we think it's bad for the image. We think, secondly, right, that these political parties probably wouldn't have taken them in to begin with, and you would have to stand as an independent candidate. The fact that you stand for an independent candidate, chances are you wouldn't even have a shot at parliament to begin with, seeing the context of Malaysian elections, right? No, thank you. Oh wait, sorry, I'll take closing.
You allow racist and bigoted individuals like Ukip and Isma to run for parliament. Why is it so wrong to allow ex-convicts who have valid concerns in education, healthcare, and politics to run parliament?
I'm sorry, whoever's watching this, but perhaps Isma and Prakasa have done really funky things in our society, right? But they haven't done anything to directly harm an individual in the sense that they have killed someone, or in the case of manslaughter. We think those things are very different in that case, right? The fact that you have concretely ruined someone's life in terms of killing that individual warrants, therefore, your right to be taken away to stand for elections. It's as simple as that. Why? We tell you, right, it affects the functionality of the government, and it's the most important thing, because firstly, you affect the cohesion between parliament members. The fact that the stigma still exists shows, therefore, that other parliament members are less likely to take your manifesto or what you are trying to champion seriously, and that harms the political state in that sense. Secondly, we say that this allows and opens a gateway, right, for other political parties to impose slander or even hate speech against these convicts, right? The fact that they just came out of prison is also open to insult as well, and open to mockery, and we think that this is bad for these individuals. We think furthermore, right, that no political party would take them in because the element of trust has also been lost in essence. Madam Chair, when all is said and done, we are not willing to give up the most important thing about today's debate, and that is the functionality of a state. We're not willing, like, we concede that perhaps certain individuals may have turned a leaf, but the fact is you have no gauge to constitute this, right? The fact that there is no true admission of guilt, and because we cannot gauge this, we are not willing to sacrifice the lives of millions. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you.
or shake hands.